And I looked over and said, "Who the hell are you?" And he looked at me and said, "Oh, you can see me? Well, good for you. You know, they look for people like you." And I was like, "They who?" All right, welcome everybody to Spirituality. I am Kat. I'm a longtime astral traveler and spirit consultant. And today I thought we would do something a little bit different than what I normally do. So, your guest for today sharing their spiritual journey is going to be me. I don't know why. I don't know why it never dawned on me before that probably if I was going to be on the internet sharing spiritual stories and giving spiritual advice, that it might be helpful if I actually introduce myself and talk about and share who I am and my journey with everybody. But it just, I don't know, it always felt a little weird and awkward to do that on my own channel for some reason. And it wasn't until recently I've been doing a lot of podcasts as a guest on other people's channels and other people's shows that I was sort of like had this epiphany that maybe I should share with you guys a little bit about who I am and how I got to be doing this. I am a little bit weird and awkward talking about it still. I'm still that girl who has to put her camera like right in front of the laptop so I don't have to look at myself on the screen. So this whole coming out and talking about these things publicly is still really pretty new to me. I spent over 30 years pretending like my abilities weren't happening and hiding it from the world. And so speaking out loud about it is still feels really vulnerable to me. So, but at any rate, without further ado, I'm just gonna jump in where shit got real for me. And I was about 12 years old when I checked out a book from the library that was all about soul travel or astral projection. It was called like The Art of Soul Travel. And I'm not sure why it seemed like the thing to do. I'm sure that it was always a guided path, an intended path for me. Like, I was that little girl that wanted to be a fighter pilot and be an astronaut. I wanted to join the space program and explore horizons, places where most people just don't get to go. And I was, well, not to date myself completely, but it was in the time when that path, because I was a female, was closed to me. I wasn't allowed to do those things. And at the time it didn't occur to me that the reason I had those longings and those feelings wanting to do that was because there was something along those lines awaiting me on my path. Now, for me, I had been raised in a family that was largely agnostic and scientifically minded. So I had never been to church. I was not familiar with religious concepts. I wasn't a part of any spiritual practice. I didn't know, I didn't get told bedtime stories about angels or anything like that. To me, checking out this book about astral travel was really more of an interesting science experiment, like to try these practices and see if it was real. So I approached it with really more of a logical mindset. And what this book had laid out in it was really a meditation practice. It was kind of a standard void state meditation, like the kind where the objective is to empty your mind and think nothing and be present in your body, feel the energy and stuff like that. So I had never heard of anything like that before, but it's pretty standard everywhere nowadays, very common. And as I began sort of this nightly practice of trying to do these meditations that were in the book, it started to have enough of an interesting effect to keep me going with it. I could feel energy in my body. I could gather up that energy, move it around. I could call in more of it from, and increase the feeling basically. And that was exciting or interesting enough for me to continue pursuing and practicing it. And it must have been a couple of months in when I got my first knowing. And nowadays it's called getting a download. But again, in those days we weren't downloading anything. So I always just called it getting the knowing. So and you know what it is, a download. I'm sure it's like a whole chunk of information, a concept that comes in total format. It doesn't even have a word order on it. But the knowing that I received was something along the lines of, you're not really in to begin with. Like, your body isn't a jam jar. You're not stuck inside of it. Like, that's not how it works. And the impression I got from the knowing was that it was something more like being tuned to a radio station. Like, physical reality, this body, this reality is a frequency that you're tuned to. So you're experiencing it, but it's not the only station that's broadcasting. There's a lot of different frequencies that are broadcasting, and they're all broadcasting simultaneously. And if you know where your dial is on your tuner, you can change the station, like, to match the frequencies of other stations to receive those. And so it was an odd sort of knowing, and I didn't think too much of it at first until one day I was laying on the couch reading a book and went to shift my body position, and it was like I thought I had fallen off the couch onto the floor. But when I stood up and turned around and looked, my body was still laying on the couch right where it had been, and I was not in it anymore. And of course, for anybody who's ever astral projected or been in a non-corporeal state, it's confusing and panicky at first. It feels weird, and I ended up right back in my body in that instance. But I had done the thing in the book. Like, it was real. Astral projection was real. I could get out of my body. And I couldn't control it very well at first, and I was really pretty wobbly and awkward, and it would happen sporadically and spontaneously, really. Like, it would just sort of happen sometimes. I wasn't doing it intentionally, but I thought it was super cool. So, in my adolescent brain, if this is real, like, I wonder what else is real, right? So it was back to the public library for me. And on this go around, I checked out a book on ancient Gaelic rites because in my head, I was like, what if magic is real? And for whatever, again, adolescent mindset that I had at the time, I thought that the coolest thing for me to try for my first foray into performing rituals was summoning fairies. And I'm sure that, for those of you who know what's up, we're not talking about Tinkerbell here, although I thought that's what I was getting. So I set up this ritual the way that it was written in the book. I gathered up a big ball of compressed energy, like just as big and as powerful as I could make it for myself at the time. When I went to go speak the words, I like released the energy ball into the words, and it felt very powerful. It felt like magic, but nothing happened. There was no fairies. Tinkerbell didn't show up to drink her offerings. Nothing like that happened, and I was just disappointed with the result. So I just left it, thinking, whatever. This was a waste of my gathering up these things. Until that night, when I was laying in bed, doing my meditation practice, I ended up like flung out of my body, like all the way across the room in the dark. And when I stood up and looked, my body was still there in the bed, but hovering next to it, sitting like hunched over it, was this large, dark form, this figure just leering over my unoccupied body. And I was terrified. Like, I panicked. I tried to flee, only to be awkward at fleeing in an astral state and end up right back in my body, only to end up flung back out of my body, only to try and flee, only to end up back in and out. And this would happen 5-6 times a night for weeks, for months. And it was to the point where the detrimental effects were starting to show. I was losing sleep. I was impossible to get up in the morning for school, all of that. And at some point I got angry enough. Like, we went from helplessness and fear to being angry enough to shout, like, what are you? Like, what do you want? At this thing that was in my room. And it told me its name, which I'm not even sure that I could or should repeat here, but it sounded, sounded like the black language of Mordor to me, and it said, "You are mine." And that's when did the unthinkable for a teenager is I went and confessed to my mom what I had been doing in my room. Now, my mom, bless her, had what I'm very grateful for the good sense not to take me and have me head shrinked or diagnosed or placed on medication, and she was never one much for, she wasn't about to, go the dogmatic religious route. I mean, I think she'd seen The Exorcist like everyone else, and she wasn't about to call the young priest and the old priest in. Like, that was not her vibe either. So she took me around to different spiritual practitioners at the time, and again, at that time the options were a lot more limited than they are today, and the internet was kind of in its infancy, so it was really whatever you could find like in the phone book or word of mouth. So we tried a bunch of different things. We tried like the psychic church, where what I can only assume was a Reiki practitioner was waving their hands around me and feeling into my energy. We tried like different tarot readers and different like Wicca people to come in and clear the room. She thought maybe there was a spirit in my room, but none of it was ever really helpful. I think the one lady who was doing the Reiki told me that whatever it is, I can't move it. Like, you're gonna have to deal with it yourself. And it wasn't something I really understood at the time, but having invited the entity in myself, it was really only ever going to be me who could deal with it. But I think I might have been like 13 years old at the time, so I mean, I was kind of thrown into the deep end without water wings at that point. Over time, it turned out that a door once opened can be passed through at will if it's not shut. And so while I was still dealing with the original entity that had been summoned to me, I also began to experience other kinds of entities, shadow figures, or sometimes people call them sleep paralysis demons. Except that I was never paralyzed because I could get out of my body. But similarly, the same kind of sort of semi-parasitic personality construct that is, trying to invoke fear or anger, or in some cases lust in people, that type of a personality construct. And I had been getting better at astral states. It would still happen sporadically, and I could get like further away from my body. I could get like out of the house and down the block before, I ended up coming back. But the real strange thing that started happening alongside all of this is that my dreams, like my regular dreams, began to change. And I remember being in a dream, and I had a friend of mine who was in my dream, a dream character that was next to me, and I remember suddenly getting the feeling, this energy feeling of like, you're not Kristen, who the hell are you? It was like I could look into their eyes specifically, and it wasn't the person that it was supposed to be. And it just looked at me and smiled like this big Joker like grin, like really unnerving. And it startled me, and I woke up thinking that was a weird thing to have happen, but it continued to happen where I was able to recognize when other personality constructs were in my vicinity. And I think just because I was so used to sensing other energy constructs in my vicinity, like because of the interactions with the shadow people and with my fairy, that I began to notice it when I was in a dream state as well, when there was another personality construct in my vicinity. And generally speaking, they were usually stunned to be recognized, at least at first. I remember looking up at one and that looked like my mom in the dream and going, "You're not my mom. Who the hell are you?" And it just looked at me and said, "You're right, I'm not, but maybe we should wake you up now." Things like that, where they were acknowledging to me that they weren't dream characters. Like, they would acknowledge that to me. And because of that feeling, it was like I was essentially accidentally becoming a lucid dreamer, which at the time I didn't even know what that was. But it was like my trigger my trigger for turning lucid in a dream was recognizing other personalities, other energy signatures in my presence. And that would happen off and on. Some of them would stop and talk to me. Sometimes they, just would leave because they didn't want to. And I remember I was in a dream sitting on a couch, and one of them just appeared next to me, like sitting on the back of the couch with its feet next to me on the couch. And I looked over and said, "Who the hell are you?" And he looked at me and said, "Oh, you can see me? Well, good for you. You know, they look for people like you." And I was like, "They who?" Now, it would be a while before I really understood who, like, they were. For a time, I was just interacting with, I always just called them the others. It was just my word for that, which was for in my head for whatever reason that wasn't me. It was other than me. So I just always called them the others. But, I would come across these other personality signatures and turn lucid, and many of them would interact with me and teach me things. And so it was from the others that I learned how to control my astral states better, how to move my frequency or change my frequency to match different frequencies, how to create and move through portals into other spheres of reality, how to manipulate the environment that I was already in. All of those types of things were all taught to me by the others, including kind of like the rules of engagement for lucid dreaming, which was sort of why I got a little bit turned off by like many people in the lucid dreaming community who, it's, I don't want to get into it too much, but personally, I was told by the others that, there are certain kinds of activities in lucid dreaming that's frowned upon. Let's just put it that way. But I learned a lot from many of these personalities. And at some point, I began to notice like odd testing or training scenarios that were not necessarily transparent in intent. And I know that sounds weird, but it was like I remember being sat in front of a monitor where it was like showing me old tiny pictures, and I became aware, lucid, that one of the others was standing behind me, and I got the knowing off of his energy immediately that they were trying to see if I recognized my previous self, a past life, like from these old timey photos. Do you recognize which one is you? And when I looked at him, I was like, "Who the hell are you people, and what is this?" And he just sort of looked at me and like pushed a little button. I was like, this one is awake." It was things like that. There was a group of them, or that the way I always defined it to myself is like, there are those who work here and ones who don't, because there was definitely like, some of them seemed to have a purpose or intent or some sort of like thing that they were trying to test for or look for, that they were being a little bit evasive about what exactly it was. They didn't want to answer my questions. And for a long time, I sort of went with these scenarios. Some of it was cognitive testing. Like, could I read in a dream? Could I do math in the dream? Could I, some stuff like that. Like, how cognitive was I really in my dreams? Some of it was psychic testing. Could I pick up on the feelings, the energies in a scenario? Could I control it? It was all like these weird training scenarios. And a lot of them were fear-based training scenarios. So could I control fear as an energy? Could I keep myself from panicking and freaking out and running away, and still control my energy and manipulate the environment, even in things that were like nightmare scenarios? But none of the testing ever really worked out very well with me because of my lucid state, and because I could sense that they were there. It was always like, I know what you guys are doing. Like, what is this? And I admit completely that I was a very obstinate student of the universe. Like, at some point, I just became frustrated and apathetic and done with whatever this was, because I wasn't getting any straight answers out of them. And So I would just like slap away their scenario with my energy and create myself a portal and move into another sphere of reality or another realm. Like I had already been taught how to do stuff like that by the ones that don't work here. So they were having difficulty controlling me. It wasn't until I had ran afoul of the regular employees that I was introduced to what I always called at the time, at least, upper management. So essentially, I was being a little spiritual Karen and throwing a fit because I didn't, whatever their rules were, they weren't being clear with me about it. And I didn't care for that. And once I became unmanageable is when upper management came in. And to be clear, I've always gotten the impression, at least, that what I refer to as upper management is what most people refer to as angels and guides. So this was definitely an energy that was non-human in nature, much bigger, much more powerful energy than what I was. They called in something that could deal with me, basically. And and honestly, I ran afoul of upper management initially. I'm a human and I'm an American and I have rights. Which it sounds ridiculous to say it like that now. Suffice to say that we've come a long way from here. But yeah, I didn't like to be told what to do or kept in the dark or controlled in any way. And so I ran a little afoul of those who work here and upper management, at least initially upon first meeting. Was not the best relationship. But in being introduced to those types of personalities, I did get some more insight. Angels and guides or upper management would actually share with me in as best they could, given my interpretation of things was fairly negative at this point. A little bit more about what was actually going on. I sort of got the impression that the usual regime of training or learning, the growth process that they generally use on human personalities that wind up in non-physical spaces was sort of not really working out well for me for whatever reason. I was never falling for it. I was always lucid. I always knew they were there. And I just, I wasn't being very cooperative. Let's just put it that way. And so I kind of got relegated to upper management for handling. But I was shown many things. I was shown the nature of physical reality and that which lies beneath physical reality. And I was, they took me to a place where I could experience like that oneness that people talk about of all that is, where like literally I could feel every blade of grass, every grain of sand, everything was an extension of my own consciousness and I was an extension of theirs. It's like everything in existence was aware of me. And simultaneously I was aware of all of it, like so many nerve endings of the same being. It was just a very overwhelming feeling, like weeping level overwhelming feeling of being that included in literally everything. And so I don't know if upper management, I don't know if the angels and guides just took pity on me and started being like, okay, we need to actually get you involved a little bit in what's going on here. But some of it started to actually be shown to me and integrated on a broader level. And but I still, for whatever reason, was like very much like, why are you people in my head though? Like for whatever reason, I still thought I was lucid dreaming. Like I was operating under that impression for a long time. Like, so it was like, but why? Like I never asked for this. What is this ability? Like, why are you people in my head? Why me? Like, if I'm not cooperative, why are you interacting with me? Why are you doing this? And I remember one day I was so mad that I was literally screaming in my car, like, it's my energy, like, get out of my energy, get out of my head. Like, that's how angry I was at the like the clairaudience and the visions and stuff. And it was the first time I had ever actually like embodiment channeled. And I remember I was driving down the road, and it was like this voice that wasn't my voice came out of my mouth and speaking words that weren't my words. Like it was like I was not in control of my body, and the voice that was coming out of it was something else. And what it said was, we're not in, you're out. Like you're out, and we're trying to help. And I think that was when I really realized that dreams are not really happening in your head to begin with, just like you're not actually in your body to begin with. Like, I don't know why that had never fully integrated for me before, and I always felt like everything was a personal invasion. But the truth of the matter is that none of it had been happening inside my head. I had always been traveling. I had always been in their in their turf, in their territory, and they had been trying to help me operate there and sort out what was going on and prepare me. And so it was a very humbling moment of like, and a good example of how our own perceptions and our own like ignorance about certain things can cause a lot of misunderstanding, especially in spheres of reality and in places that are largely unexplored and with concepts that we largely still don't have words to describe. I had been behaving very ignorantly, basically, in spiritual spaces and other dimensions that I didn't even realize I was in, really. After that knowing really integrated, like settled in, that was when things started to get, I mean, if it didn't sound weird enough before, things got even weirder, because it's when I started like being in an astral state, but then realizing that I was the person helping a human with their death experience, with their transition back to spirit. I was acting as a psychopomp, helping people get, helping people walk down the hallway or get to the light or whatever their imagery was. I suddenly realized that I was working with other people in their dreams. Like originally I had been working with, the others had been working with me in my dreams. And suddenly I realized some of these people that I was helping, these are human signatures. This is a human construct. Like this is a currently physically focused human, and I'm in their dream space. Like that was a big like mind fuck for me, because it felt like such an invasion of privacy to me initially, just like it had when it was happening to me. I felt like I'm invading other people's privacy. The whole thing just took a long time to integrate and really get used to and be okay with. But again, over a long period of time, and it's like 30 years of experiences, so I'm trying to be very concise as I can be. But I did eventually come to terms with it and realize what was actually happening, and step more fully into my role of doing this kind of work on the other side, while still exploring other dimensions and other levels of reality with sets of physics or sets of rules that have nothing to do with how our reality is set up at all. And so just over time, there was a lot that I was able to glean from that about how non-physical realities work versus physical realities, and the different ways that the layers of reality are set up, how energy moves from in and out of realities. There's just a lot that came out of it for me. But I still hadn't like really told anybody. Like my husband didn't know. My kids didn't know. My mom always knew, but I hadn't like, she always knew about at least the initial stuff, but I hadn't really talked about it in a long time. So as far as she knew, it wasn't happening anymore. And so like never mind my friends or coworkers, like my own family didn't know about it. And it's not exactly like, how do you bring that up at a water cooler? You can't exactly, when somebody's like, how was your evening? You can't exactly be, oh, it was great, except for like the spirit that I had to help cross over and the dream demons I've been dealing with. It's just, it's weird. to the vast majority of people in the world, it still sounds like hooey fooey. And so I'd always been very much in the closet about it, but I did kind of end up having this dark night of the soul where I just realized the job I was in, the life I was leading, the standard life was, it didn't fit. It felt wrong. It was awkward. And I landed myself to the point where I couldn't even get out of bed in the morning. Like I wasn't even calling into work. I wasn't even moving. I couldn't get out of bed. That life was just done for me. We weren't going to do that anymore. And so I retired from working for anybody really and decided that, okay, fine, I just work for the universe at this point. And I don't know what that means. Usually I end up, whoever I end up talking to, whatever spheres of reality I end up in, whatever visions I end up stepping into, or wherever it is I'm going is just, I just go with the flow. I go with whatever the guidance is and just help wherever I can. And I sort of realized that part of me being able to really embrace all of that was being able to talk about it out loud, to share my experiences with other people, to be a platform for other people to share their experiences, to help cultivate a better understanding of how things actually work so that more people can experience that feeling of oneness, that we're all really the same and we're all really extensions of the same source energy, the same consciousness. It really is a transforming experience, as I'm sure many of you already know. So that is how we got where we are right now, talking to a camera, or at least trying to, and being a platform for people to share their journey and sharing what I can about the things I've learned to help put things out there. So that is kind of the brief version of my journey. Hopefully it was insightful for people, or maybe there's some ways in which other people can relate. I don't know. Drop me a comment, let me know, like, subscribe, all of that fun stuff, and we will see you guys next time on spirituality.